Alright, welcome back to video 3 of this 4-part series. We're dealing with chapter 12, dealing with template styles and macros. In this particular video, we're going to focus more on the macros piece. Macros, again, just by definition, are just a set of instructions that execute a sequence of commands that automate a repetitive or routine task. So it's a pragmatic piece of code within Microsoft Excel that you can create that does the same task or the same calculations, the same application of style, font, whatever. It does that repetitively throughout however you call or use the macro. So think of it as an Excel personal assistant. It basically does what you tell it to do. Some of the benefits of using macros is you get some consistency in how the macro runs and works and applies or calculates. It's much more efficient in terms of speed. So if you're having to do multiple calculations within a macro or multiple steps within a macro, it does it very, very quickly. Again, because it's a repetitive type task, the accuracy, provided that everything is set up correctly, it's accurate based on the parameters of the macro. And again, I mentioned the efficiency. It just kind of quickly, repetitively does the task, so you don't have to go in there and click through a bunch of commands and things. So one thing in speaking to macros is that by default, the Microsoft Excel workbook file, a .xlsx file, cannot store macros. So anytime that you use Microsoft Excel and you're including macros in there, you need to save it as one of these other three file names in there. Macro enabled workbook, which is the more common Excel binary workbook, or macro enabled template if you're saving it as a template file. We're going to look at two methods for macro creation. The first one, we're actually going to look at more of the macro reader, and then in the second video, we'll look more at the Visual Basic for applications, coding and the actual instruction set. So we're going to look at macro reader, which basically reports keystrokes, commands, or mouse clicks, stores it in a command as VBA code, or Visual Basic for application code. And then whenever you call that macro, whether it be a keyboard shortcut or via a button where you actually set that button to run the macro, it basically takes those reported keystrokes, commands, instructions, and runs them according to how you specify. So again, with dealing with the macro recorder, that has to be added. Macros have to be added. You have to add the developer tab to the ribbons. We have File, we have Home, Insert, all those. We have to go to File, Options, Customize Ribbon, and we'll do that here shortly. To add the developer tab, we're going to click Record Macro. We're basically going to give it a name. It asks for all these various pieces of information. You can assign a keyboard shortcut, a storage option if you want to store it within the workbook itself. You can add a description what the macro does. Then you run through and click through, perform the commands that you want to record as part of the macro. And then once you're done, you click Stop the Macro Recorder, either one of these three options here. And essentially that's how you create a macro. And again, it's pragmatic, it's repetitive tasks, things that you do over and over again. So macros kind of make those type of tasks really efficient. In working with macros, one thing to kind of keep in mind, if you're using other cells or other input values, or other cell references as part of your macro, the default setting for creating a macro is that it uses absolute references, absolute cell references. So we talked about that in 3 or 4 chapters ago, maybe even further back. We talked about absolute references. So those are the $, column name, $, row number. If you need to use a relative cell reference as part of your macro, you need to select that option before performing the commands. And we'll take a look at that. We're also going to look at running a macro. The best recommendation is to test the macro before you put it out there in production. So run it on a blank workbook or a blank worksheet. Make sure that verify that it works as designed. We're also going to look at creating a macro button. And basically, this macro button is going to be tied to that macro that we create. So whenever we click on a cell and we click that macro button, it's going to essentially do to run that macro. The last piece I want to talk about with regard to macros is dealing with macro security. So most of you are probably familiar with the fact that macros can be very malicious. If you think about all the things that you can do by recording clicks and things of that nature in a macro, think of all the malicious things that can be done in recording in a macro. And somebody sends you that file, you download it, you run that macro, and then all of a sudden it formats your C drive. Or, does whatever, something malicious. So by default, Excel will disable macros if you open it up into Microsoft Excel. Somebody sends you a file. So what you have to do is go to the Trust Center dialog, change the security settings. But again, be advised and make sure that you can trust the person who sent you the workbook and the macros that are embedded in it. So let's go over to, again, our Excel spreadsheet workbook that we've created here. And we're going to go ahead and first, again, as I mentioned, we're going to have to go to File, Options, and we're going to have to go Customize Ribbon. And what we want to do is we need to add in the developer. We need to add in the developer tab. So we're going to go, and if you look over at Customize the Ribbon main tabs, you'll see that developer is unchecked. So we want to check that. Click OK. And now that we see our developer tab is been included. So add that in there so that you can start working through your macros. And so again, we talked about how to create a macro. So the first thing you do is click Record Macro. It's going to give you a macro name, and I'm going to type change look. Okay. You can give it a shortcut. I'm going to give the shortcut of Control exclamation point. Be careful in creating shortcut keys for this because a lot of your Windows shortcuts like Control C, Control V already have some commands in there. If you think about it, they're actual macros within the operating system that are executed to handle certain common tasks. So I'm going to do Control exclamation point, which essentially is going to be Control Shift 1. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. The shortcut key must be a letter. Okay, so let's give it Control. I don't know. Control Q. So Control Shift. There we go. Control Shift Q. All right. We click OK. And once we're going to store that in the workbook. I left that highlighted in there. And if you want to, go ahead and type the description in there. Essentially what this macro is going to do, I'm going to change to where this macro is going to go ahead and it is going to bold, italicize, and underline the text that I select. I'm going to change my font to Algerian. And then essentially that's all at this point in time I want my macro to do. So I'm going to go over here and click View. I'm going to click Macro, and I'm going to click Stop Recording. So basically what I've done is created a series of steps for creating a macro. So essentially what I've done is I've gone through a series of steps where I create the commands that I want to go ahead and run to change the font and the font size, the font and the look of it. So I've created my macro to do that. Again, I do Control Shift Q, and if you notice, now that ran a series of commands where it went in there and it changed the font to Algerian, it underlined, it bold, and italicized the text. So again, that's just a simple macro creation in that respect. What you can do in addition to that is you can create a button that will do the same thing. We'll go in here to our developer tab. Okay, and in the control group, we're going to do insert. I'm going to select a button. It's going to give me a crosshair. I'm going to go ahead and create a button. It comes up with assign macro. I've got my change look. Okay, I'm going to click OK. I'm going to click OK. I can go in here and edit the text. So I'm going to go in here and just edit this as change look. Okay, I've got my button. Got my macro assigned to my button. I go in here and if I click change look, I select myself and it changes the look. I can do that to any and all of my macros. So again, you can set up your macros to do a number of things. Change the look and feel. In this particular sense, we're running a series of text modifications in here. So that's just a kind of a simple cut and dry. What does macro do? So instead of having to go through and change a bunch of text, formatting, things of that nature, you can create a macro to do that, or to do other things within Microsoft itself. So again, if you have any questions with regard to macros or any of the other material we've covered in here, go ahead and email me at ryan.free@ppcc.edu.